Today's story is yet another one involving an Oni attack, and is probably the one that the people who lived in the capital of Heian found the most disturbing. Because while it was one thing for an Oni to attack a helpless girl on the outskirts of the city, or in the expanse of a field that is a fair distance away from any of the main buildings, this next story was an attack on a fully grown man inside one of the most important offices in the ancient Japanese government, demonstrating that there really is nowhere truly safe from the monsters that hide in the dark. Yokoso owashitare, and welcome back to yet another classical Japanese folktale. So if you like ancient Japanese history, legends, folklore, culture, or if you just like storytelling in general, please don't forget to like the video. Please subscribe to the channel as well, because I put out at least one new Tales video every week on top of some other stuff that I like to do. But, with all of that out of the way, let's just get into the actual story. I will also warn you, this story, like the last couple of stories, does describe a fairly gruesome scene. I don't think it will bother most of you, but just in case you're not a fan of such things, this is your warning. Once upon a time, ima wa mukashi. Every morning, while it was dark, the members of the Daijokan held the Asamatsurigoto, or the morning administration. Now the Daijokan, known as the Great Council of State, was, according to Wikipedia, the highest organ of Japan's imperial government. Essentially, this is where the most powerful men in the country gathered to deliberate, to administer, and to rule the whole country. This was nearly the furthest thing from some abandoned estate in the backwoods that you could get. Oh no. This was where the emperor himself was sometimes crowned, and where the most important matters of government were handled regularly. You could think of this as something like the ancient Japanese version of the Capitol building, where the United States Congress meets. It's not where anyone lives, technically, and the most powerful individual, the president in the case of the modern US, and the emperor in the case of ancient Japan, doesn't hang out there much, but it's where a group of very high government officials gather to do their jobs. Now again, every morning, long before dawn broke, some of the more diligent ministers would show up for morning administration. They probably did this less to actually get as much done during the day as they could, and more to put on the appearance of being busy and diligent in order to curry favor with their superiors and rise up in the ranks. Nothing like being up before the crack of dawn, having already completed a pile of tasks, to make your boss like you. Now at this time, there was a young administrator, a sakan, which was the lowest position of administration that one could have in the Daijokan. His name is unfortunately lost to us, the original text likely being damaged in such a way that's illegible. But for our story, this sakan was late for morning administration. Now, as one of the lower members of this organization, and given the importance of appearances and diligence in Japanese culture, you can imagine how stressful this was for the young man. Here he was, having made it into one of the most important circles in the country, one that could potentially lead him to bigger and better things. But this position, no doubt, also had no shortage of hopeful candidates eager to take any chance they could get and replace anyone demonstrating even the slightest amount of complacency. And this aspiring young sakan that we are dealing with was late. The sakan's boss, a man who held the position of Ben, and was one rank above the young man in the Daijokan's organization, was always on time for morning administration without fail. And given the nature of their jobs, he likely would accept no excuses for being tardy. If the Ben could do it, so could anyone else. And anyone not willing to show up on time was going to have to do a lot of explaining as to why they shouldn't look for someone else who was clearly much more willing to do what must be done to keep the job. And so, while it was still dark outside, this young sakan, our main character, found himself tearing through the capital streets as fast as he could, doing his best not to trip over potholes or rocks hidden by the dark, and dreading the reprimand he was sure was waiting for him. There was always the chance, though, that the Ben was sick or hadn't shown up for whatever reason, The capital aristocrats had the most fragile health and could come up with plenty of genteel and sophisticated excuses for why they couldn't show up to work. Maybe the Ben had done just that. Hopefully. Maybe. Not likely, though. Hoping for at least a little bit of luck here, the Sakan managed to arrive at the Nakano Mikado Gate on the eastern side of the palace complex, and what he saw made his heart sink. The Ben's carriage was parked just outside. He hadn't called in sick or made some other excuse as to not show up to work that day. He was there and probably not happy that his underling was tardy. The young man picked up his pace and made his way over to the Daijokan office building. After entering the office grounds through the north gate, he found the Ben servants just on the inside of the surrounding walls, clearly at the ready. A further reminder that yes, the Ben had arrived a while ago and was no doubt very impatiently waiting just inside the building. Dreading the thought of having to face his superior and feeling very keenly the insignificance of the office that he himself held, the Sakan nevertheless dutifully made his way toward the east side of the building, the place where he worked. If he was going to get reprimanded, best to face it with honesty and dignity rather than gin up some excuse that would only make him look disgraceful on top of late. Still running because every second was precious here, the Sakan practically jumped up the few stairs that led to the veranda and slid open the eastern door in a hurry. The Sakan braced himself to see his boss's scowl and then be crushed under a string of verbal reprimands, a stack of papers, and all sorts of other unpleasantries. But when he slid the door open, he just saw darkness. Again, it was still dark outside, with not even the glow of dawn in the east, and the inside of the office was darker still. And yet the Ben hadn't lit any candles. Even after a second or two of standing there confused, gazing into the shadows trying to make out something, anything, there was neither sight nor sound of anyone inside. Not even the soft rustle of clothes or the sound of breathing. Had the Ben not shown up after all? But then why was his carriage at the gate to the palace complex and his servants at the ready just outside? Utterly confused, the Sakan, not having anything to light the room and have a look around, he then closed the door and headed for the group of servants. As soon as he was close enough, he asked them where the Ben was. Seemingly confused and possibly a little annoyed, they answered that their lord was in the east office as usual. The Sakan was dumbstruck. He had just been to the east office and it was completely dark and silent. What were they talking about? What was going on? Sensing that something was not right, the Sakan grabbed one of the younger servants from the Ben's entourage, brought him over to the east office, and had him light a torch and sent him in, following close behind. They needed to figure out what the heck was going on. Now, as soon as the candlelight lit up a small section of the room, at first glance there wasn't really much anything amiss. The Ben wasn't like hiding in the shadows and waiting to jump out and scare them, nor had he simply fallen asleep and let the candles die out. Neither of which made much sense, but then neither did the Ben being completely absent either. Something, though, was definitely not right. The Sakan and the servant then made their way over to the Ben's official seat, which was an obvious place to start, of course. As soon as the orange glow of the torch fell on it, though, they immediately realized what had happened to the Ben. On top of his seat, stained in patches of fresh blood, itself bloodied and torn up with only bits and pieces of his hair still clinging to the tattered scalp, was the Ben's decapitated head, staring lifelessly at them. When their eyes met, the Sakan verbally gasped and jerked himself back and said aloud, "What is this?" He couldn't believe it. What sort of horror story had he stumbled into? Was he dreaming? This couldn't be real. It was too awful. Tearing his eyes away from this horrific sight and looking around the room in near panic, he noticed, off to the side, the Ben's shoes and shaku. A shaku is a little ancient Japanese baton thing, both also bloodstained. And next to those things was the Ben's fan, which was clean and had some notes scribbled on it about the day's tasks that the Ben apparently had wanted to address. Looking to the opposite end of the room, the Sakan and the servant then found a tatami mat that was absolutely drenched in thick, dark blood, some of which was still dripping onto the floor of the building. It took both of these young men a minute to process the shock of the whole thing. I mean, what do you even do in a situation like this? Seeing someone you know in literal pieces was already bad enough, but not knowing how or when exactly it happened and knowing that the thing that did it was still at large. That is a terrifying situation to be in. But the pair managed to hold on to enough courage to risk searching the place a little longer, looking to see if they could find whatever remained of the Ben's body. Maybe there was a trail of blood, or maybe they could find his clothes or even other torn up body parts of the Ben's. Despite their best efforts, there was nothing else. Whatever had attacked the Ben in this room had dragged him off somewhere completely out of sight if it hadn't just devoured him then and there, clothing and all. But these two men, while wanting to know what happened, probably weren't super fond of the idea of searching too hard, lest they end up following this thing back to whatever dark recess it had crawled out of, and inadvertently become a second course. However, soon day broke, and with it, word spread like wildfire all over the palace grounds. And it wasn't long before there was a crowd of people just outside the office, rubbernecking and trying to ascertain the truth of the situation for themselves, making a huge ruckus as they did so. At some point, someone passed on the Ben's head to his servants, who promptly gathered it up and left. I guess it's a good thing that the ancient Japanese had a tradition of literal head hunting and head preserving when it came to war, so the Ben servants weren't too scared of taking care of it, macabre as that may be to us now. From then on, however, nobody went to the East Office for morning administration. But it was apparently an important enough activity that they couldn't just cancel it altogether. Instead, they moved it to the West Office, which honestly doesn't seem to me like the most appropriate form of caution because it's still basically just the same building. Though I'm not an expert in the layout of the old Daijokan building, so maybe it was fine, but personally for me, I would move it way far away. Obviously, this place is just no good. We can't be here anymore. But the story does leave us with one final warning. And thus is it said that even if you are about the business of the court and are within the walls of the palace complex, you should never stay in a dark corner far out of sight of anyone else, because you never know what might be hiding in some nook or cranny, just waiting for you to end up alone. But that is the end of the story, and I do have to wonder if maybe the Oni actually was the same one from the previous story. I mean, I can't imagine that there were multiple Oni running around the inner parts, the actual palace complex, so perhaps it was the same one. And I should have looked up the time period when these two events actually occurred. I believe, I should have done that. But who knows? Maybe Oni are also very long-lived, so maybe it was just the same one. Again, I can't imagine that there were multiple of them running around, but then I couldn't have imagined that one of them was running around at all, so who knows? So, if you did enjoy this story, please don't forget to give the video a like. Please subscribe to the channel because I do put at least one of these Tales videos out every week, on top of doing some other videos where I analyze classical Japanese in video games, or I react to video games that have something to do with Japanese history. You know, just little fun things here and there, but the main thing that this channel is a ancient Japanese storytelling YouTube channel. And please don't forget to share it with everybody who you think might be mildly interested in this, Japanese history friends, anime friends, because some of these stories do influence the way that Japanese pop culture comes about. I mean, Oni are not an unknown facet in modern Japanese pop culture. And if you've been watching all the way up to the end here, I do thank you sincerely. Ito ureshiu koso hanberikere, and hopefully we will see you next week for the next story that explains possibly why in none of these stories a creature capable of tearing an adult human being to pieces always ends up going unseen, and how one man's bravery can solve the entire Oni problem. But that is going to be it. Thank you so much, guys. We'll see you later. Goodbye.